Hello friends, welcome to Islington Listens, wisdom from a community of faith that doesn't think the same, vote the same, or love the same, but we are trying our best to follow in the way of Jesus with compassion and hope. This is our fourth week of recovering the ancient tradition and practice of Christian hospitality. And I want to remind you that last week I left you with 3 small acts to begin to practice. First is to make eye contact and be paying attention to those who are around you. So I said last week that I wouldn't invite you to do that, but today I am going to invite you just to turn and notice and with your eyes smile at the people around you. Think you can do that? Yeah, no words, just notice who's there. All right, little eye contact. And then you might want to learn a name. Think about if you know the name of the person beside you. We all know who Fran is now, but I wonder who else you might know. Just ask the person beside you what their name is. That's it, not their life story, just their name. See if you can memorize it. Turn me back on. Yeah, this is not like the welcome time like we usually do. I gave that to the band, so come back to me. To notice and make eye contact with another human, to know their name, those 2 things invite you into the next step of being in relationship, which often is judgment. Because then if all you see is a human and all you know is their name, you start to make judgment about their life story by what they look like. And I am inviting you, the third practice from the sermon for the band who missed it last week is eye contact, knowing a name, and then giving people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were late. Maybe they've had a really hard week. What we do not know about people's stories and yet quickly assume that we do. That is the bridge to hospitality being our practice. And so we turn to the next step, which is in our scriptures today, moving from small acts. You guys can come on in. Like this is like whatever the band needs. If people are coming in late, it's fine. Small acts of respect and welcome are potent far beyond themselves. You may be the only person who's really looked and noticed someone else this week in that moment of eye contact. But today, the scriptures call us to talk about how we get dressed for acts of hospitality. I want to recognize this morning how getting dressed for church has changed. I appreciate that the Metropolitan Silver Band has worn for us what used to be the dress code in this place for many years. And I have a giant mirror in my office to prove it, because there was a time when those who went before me brought all of the communion elders or the ushers in, made sure that they were pressed in their morning suits with stripes and gloves. Some of you are remembering this. There was a time that getting ready for church looked different than it does today. There was an intention behind that when we gathered for worship that we brought our best, whatever our Sunday best was, and that we marked the Sabbath with different clothes because it was a different day than all the rest of the days of the week. But it quickly turned into, notice me, who might be the best dressed, or a dress code who tells us who belongs and who doesn't belong. It is very clear this morning who is part of the band and who is not part of the band. So we pay attention to how our clothes invite us into relationship or block us from relationship. In fact, at our worst, when we honor 206 years of history, we honor that there has been times of inclusion and times of exclusion. Because our history is splattered with failures in hospitality, with expressions of non-recognition of people, where an existing hierarchy in the world made its way into the hierarchy of our religious institutions. And we know that the worst case of that is the enforcement of religious boundaries that are tied to political power. And we can weave it and trace it through history. For Jewish people, through certain groups of immigrant people, from neighbor to neighbor and nation to nation. It lives in our own stories, and it's present when we gather today. So reclaiming the practice of hospitality is a step to healing our history, because the basis of hospitality is recognition. All human beings are marked, as the scripture said, with the image of Creator, made in the image of God, giving fundamental dignity to every person who deserves recognition and respect, and that we recognize in others who are different than ourselves. We recognize things we may share in common as humans. In fact, we see in each other the fact that we depend on one another. And we must contemplate as we look at others that those we see have the same vulnerabilities and dependence that we do as well. Our siblings, our neighbors. Image of Creator. If we trace our history back to the places where it went awry, it's where we failed to notice that. And we today are living into what it means to give every person, notice them, and have them be worthy of respect because of the work of God in them. Not because of their job or their education or where they live or how they dress, but because of the work of God in them. Jesus identified with the least of these. Christ is welcome to us in every guest. So thus, God gives us a different set of clothes with qualities that we might clothe ourselves in today. And I am curious if you put these clothes on before you arrived, or if you're grabbing for them now because you're feeling a little naked as the day started difficult. These clothes of compassion and kindness and humility and forgiveness and love, they lead us to a different kind of recognition. It's a recognition that transcends social differences and breaks social boundaries and excludes certain categories or kinds of persons. Recognition that recognizes the worth of all. It's not about how many awards you've won, if you made it first across the finish line. In the image of God is for all of us. And when a person who is not seen or respected within society is welcomed into a different way, when they have experienced being turned away or not being welcomed, it's even more important for this place to be a place that crosses those boundaries. For we see people and we offer them dignity and worth. It's why in Catherine Lott's acceptance of her new role as the hospitality ministry lead, and it expanded to our facility and our space, she named that she wants everyone who arrives here to the office, be it the Amazon delivery person, the contractor who's getting work done, to experience that respect and dignity, to leave having felt like, well, that was the best stop on my route. Or the work of our anti-racism committee that's inviting people from our neighborhood to give us some advice on how we clothe our space, how our art and our space tell the story of who is recognized here. What can we archive or add in order for people to recognize themselves here, to see the rainbow variety of how we are made in the image of God, that this space speaks boldly against our history and steps us into God's future. Or the work of our Affirm team as we rebuild and as we pay attention to those commitments we meet as Islington and Bloordale unite, as we listen to the names that people choose for themselves and the language we use that gives people their humanness back. And how about the practice of hospitality? Because eating together is the great leveler. We are all eaters and drinkers. When people sit down together, we share that in common. And it's the clearest time of being with others rather than doing for others. The power of recognition as a practice of hospitality is the most important piece in when we share meal together. Justice is served because we may know each other. You recognize the stranger differently when you share a meal with them. In fact, it redefines who your neighborhood is. And as our community has grown and added people online, our idea of neighborhood is reaching much more than just the streets around us. Because a stranger is only someone you don't know. And so that takes us to the Good Samaritan story. It widens our scope to anyone in need, not just the ones who can afford it or who are like us, or even who we like. That's the power of that parable, because Jesus widens the circle story after story to even include the well-being of our enemies. What does it feel like to take that into the next couple of weeks politically? How does it shape us to know that Jesus widens the circle to include the well-being of even our enemies? And I speak all of this out of a history of clergy before me who would go door to door to door and invite themselves in for coffee, who spent their time at kitchen tables getting to know people. And when it was anniversary time a few years ago, well, Stuart East and Glenn Swayze, they dressed up as that horse and rider who used to ride from Metropolitan to us through the city. And they went on the, I think, police horses through the town. And of course, Stuart East left his people behind because he always loved to ride and ride fast. It was a representation for them that the love of God is on the move, and this neighborhood is invited to be part of it. One household at a time. I am grateful this morning not to be riding horseback, but I am equally committed to the fact that Christians meeting face to face and knowing each other is what will begin this revolution of hospitality in this neighborhood. And you might not have a picture of John Wesley in your mind, but when I got to go to his home in England, in the basement of his home is his hat and his robe and his shoes. He's quite a small man. And when I think about his clothes that he wore riding, which lead us through that tradition of opening the gospel for people to this day, I was reminded about his invitation for us to help the world. He said, one great reason why the rich in general have so little sympathy for the poor is because they so seldom visit them. He was worried in his time about us quickly developing into not a society of bad people, but a society with people out of touch with the suffering of the vast majority of the world's population today, including those within their own neighborhood. John Wesley then observed for us what could be the temptation, which is to only spend time with people like us and to be out of touch with the face-to-face invitation of what's around us. And we've experienced those boundary crossings in churches, families, neighborhoods, and other organizations that you're part of. Authentic communities practice this. If it's not a genuine thing here on a small scale, eating together at round tables and sharing meals, then we don't really have any legs to stand on to say something boldly on a larger scale. And we have experienced it because when people come together and build relationships across those boundaries, then the needs of even the most marginalized people are met. Think of the cities of refuge, the hospitable households, the Underground Railroad, the sanctuary tradition, how those have made differences for people of life and death. For 206 years, this church has been a place where relationships cross social boundaries, where people have witnessed meeting the image of God in another. At coffee hour, at the committee table, leading to refugee support and the Maybell food program and the diversity of our children's chorus. and who knows what God has for us next. Recognize that there is so much more to a person. You don't need to ask them where they're from or what they do. Why don't you ask them what music they love, or how they spend their time, or what lights them up, or what they have fun doing? Get curious about things you might share. Ask good questions so that we may know each other. Good questions lead to maybe finding something that you share in common, or something that you might want to learn. They even lead to friendship, spending time together, which no law or revolution or call to justice will do faster. Understanding and acceptance come from the act of hospitality and recognizing the image of God in each other. This gives us permission to come to church dressed in the clothes of Colossians. In fact, actually, I'm just so glad you came to church today. It doesn't matter at all to me what you're wearing. See if that fits okay or not, because for some of us, that's a hard thing to say. Yeah, my dad's cheering and my mom's rolling her eyes. So these are two things you might know about my family. In this place, you belong, not because of what you look like or how you're dressed, not even because of what you believe or how you behave. You belong here because you're made in the image of God. And we all will put on those clothes of kindness, humility, patience, forgiveness, and love. We will listen to the theme songs that play in our head as we're invited into friendship. Remember that theme song of that little TV show called Friends? I'll be there for you, like I've been there before. Long before that was written, the church knew about how to live into that in love. Or if you need to go to a Beatles song, it might be I Get By with a little help from my friends. I'm going to give you a third song, which is a hymn called When I Needed a Neighbor. Thanks be to God.
Thanks for listening, friends. For other ways to connect, go to islingtonunited.org. May God's wisdom and love keep finding you.